The dust kicked up in angry clouds as Sarah Martinez swung the heavy sledgehammer one more time. 8 months pregnant, sweat streaming down her face despite the October chill, she drove another fence post deep into the unforgiving Texas soil. Her back arched, her hands were raw and bleeding through worn work gloves, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Not when everything she'd ever dreamed of was about to slip away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What Sarah didn't know was that less than a mile away, someone was watching her through expensive binoculars. Someone who owned half the county and had the power to change her life forever. Someone who was about to discover that the most dangerous thing in all of Texas wasn't a rattlesnake or a wild stallion. It was a desperate woman with nothing left to lose. The Riverside Ranch had been in the Martinez family for 4 generations. Passed down from Sarah's great-grandfather, who'd won it in a poker game back in 1892. At least, that's how the family legend went. The truth was probably more complicated, but Sarah had always loved that story. It made the 847 acres of rolling hills, mesquite trees, and stubborn cattle seem like they were meant to be theirs. Now, at 26 and 8 months pregnant, Sarah stood alone on land that might not be hers much longer. The trouble had started 6 months earlier when her husband Jake died in a farming accident. The tractor had rolled on a steep slope while he was checking the fence line near Cedar Creek. Sarah had found him 3 hours later when he didn't come home for lunch. By then, it was too late. The funeral had been a blur of casseroles, condolences, and lawyers. That's when Sarah learned the devastating truth. Jake had taken out a massive loan against the ranch to buy new equipment and expand their cattle operation. The monthly payments were $3,200, and with Jake gone, there was no way to make them. The bank had given her 90 days to get current on the payments or face foreclosure. That was 87 days ago. Sarah had tried everything. She'd sold Jake's truck, his hunting rifles, even her grandmother's wedding ring. She'd applied for jobs in town, but who was going to hire a pregnant woman with no college degree and no experience outside of ranch work? She'd called every relative she could think of, but the Martinez family had never been rich. They were land rich and cash poor. As her father used to say before he died of a heart attack 5 years earlier, the only thing left was the cattle. 43 head of prime Angus beef cattle that should have been worth enough to save the ranch. Should have been. But here's where Sarah's story took a turn that would change everything. 3 weeks ago, she discovered that 26 of her cattle were missing. At first, she thought they'd broken through the fence and wandered onto neighboring property. It happened sometimes, especially during dry spells when the grass was better on the other side. But when she rode out to check the fence line, she found something that made her blood run cold. The fence hadn't been broken. It had been cut. Clean, deliberate cuts in the wire at 3 different locations along the eastern boundary of her property. Someone had stolen her cattle. Sarah had called the sheriff's office immediately, but Deputy Williams had been less than helpful. He'd driven out, taken a look around, and basically told her that cattle theft was hard to prove and even harder to prosecute. Without witnesses or clear evidence of who had taken them, there wasn't much he could do. He'd suggested she check with her neighbors to see if the cattle had wandered onto their land, but Sarah knew better. She'd grown up on this ranch, and she knew every inch of that fence line. She also knew her cattle. Those weren't wandering cows, they were stolen goods. The problem was, she was pretty sure she knew who had taken them. The Riverside Ranch shared its longest border with the Double Diamond Ranch, a sprawling 15,000-acre operation owned by the Blackwood family. The Blackwoods had been trying to buy out smaller ranchers in the area for years, consolidating land to build what they called a modern agricultural empire. They'd made offers on the Martinez Ranch 3 times in the past decade, each time increasing their bid, and each time being politely turned down. But Richard Blackwood Jr., The current head of the family wasn't known for taking no for an answer. At 42, he was ruthless in business and had a reputation for getting what he wanted, one way or another. He drove a $90,000 truck, wore custom-made boots that cost more than most people made in a month, and had never worked a day of hard labor in his life. Sarah had no proof that Blackwood had taken her cattle, but she had suspicions. The cuts in the fence were too clean, too professional. This wasn't the work of some random cattle thief looking to make a quick buck. This was strategic. Without those cattle, Sarah couldn't make even a fraction of what she needed to save the ranch. She'd done the math 100 times, sitting at her kitchen table late at night with papers spread everywhere and her unborn baby kicking restlessly inside her. Even if she found the cattle and sold them immediately, she'd still be short. The bank wanted $12,800 to bring the loan current, plus fees and penalties. Her cattle, if she could find them, might bring $8,000. If she was lucky. That's when Sarah made a decision that everyone, including her, would later agree was either the bravest or most foolish thing she'd ever done. She decided to build a fence, not just any fence, but a fortress. If someone was stealing her cattle, she was going to make it impossible for them to do it again. And if she was going to lose the ranch anyway, she was going to go down fighting. Sarah had about $800 left in her checking account and a credit card that wasn't maxed out yet. She drove to the farm supply store in town and bought everything she could afford: fence posts, barbed wire, brackets, concrete mix, and tools. The clerk, a young man named Tommy who'd gone to school with Jake, looked at her with a mixture of concern and confusion. "Mrs. Martinez, you sure you want to be doing fence work in your condition?" he'd asked, glancing nervously at her swollen belly. "I'm sure," Sarah had replied, loading another roll of barbed wire into her truck. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, Sarah had been working from dawn to dusk, building the most comprehensive fence system she could manage. She'd started with the eastern boundary, the side that bordered the Double Diamond Ranch, and worked her way around the property. The work was backbreaking for someone in her condition, but Sarah had grown up doing ranch work. She knew how to dig post holes, stretch wire, and mix concrete. What she didn't know was that her fence-building project was attracting attention. The first person to notice was Dolores Hernandez, who owned the small grocery store in town. Dolores had been friends with Sarah's mother and had known Sarah since she was a baby. When Sarah came in to buy supplies, looking exhausted and covered in dirt, Dolores had tried to talk her out of the project. "Mia, you need to rest," Dolores had said, using the Spanish term of endearment that Sarah's mother had used. "That baby's going to come soon, and you need your strength." But Sarah had just smiled and bought another bag of concrete mix. The second person to notice was Dr. Patricia Reeves, Sarah's obstetrician. During her weekly checkup, Dr. Reeves had taken one look at Sarah's calloused hands and sunburned face and launched into a lecture about the dangers of physical labor during pregnancy. "Sarah, I understand you're going through a difficult time, but you have to think about your baby," Dr. Reeves had said. "What you're doing is dangerous. You could go into early labor, hurt your back, or worse." Sarah had nodded and promised to be more careful, but they both knew she wasn't going to stop. The third person to notice was someone Sarah didn't expect: Marcus Thompson, the mailman who delivered to the rural routes outside of town. Marcus had been delivering mail for 23 years, and he'd never seen anything like what Sarah was doing. Every day when he drove past the Riverside Ranch, there was Sarah, 8 months pregnant, swinging a sledgehammer or stretching barbed wire in the scorching sun. Marcus started timing his route so he could check on her, bringing her cold water and sometimes a sandwich his wife had packed. He didn't ask questions. He could see the determination in her eyes and the desperation in the way she worked. But he started telling people in town about what he was seeing. "That Martinez girl is something else," he'd tell anyone who would listen. 8 months pregnant and building fences like her life depends on it. Never seen anything like it. Word spread the way it does in small towns. Pretty soon, everyone in Millbrook knew about the pregnant woman who was single-handedly fencing her entire ranch. Some people thought she was crazy. Others thought she was inspiring. A few thought she was dangerous to herself and her unborn child. But Sarah didn't care what people thought. She had a job to finish. The physical toll was enormous. Her back aches constantly. Her hands were a mess of blisters and cuts, and she was exhausted all the time. But emotionally, the work was saving her. Every post she drove, every wire she stretched, every concrete mixer she poured was a small victory against the forces trying to take away everything she loved. She worked through morning sickness that had returned with a vengeance in her 3rd trimester. She worked through swollen ankles and the constant need to use the bathroom. She worked through the loneliness that threatened to overwhelm her when she thought about Jake and how he should be here helping her, preparing for their first child together. Most of all, she worked through the fear. Fear that she would lose the ranch. Fear that she would end up homeless with a newborn baby. Fear that all the generations of Martinez family history would end with her. By the end of the 2nd week, Sarah had completed nearly half the perimeter of the ranch. The fence was solid, professional-looking work that would have made any experienced rancher proud. The posts were perfectly spaced, the wire was taut, and the corners were reinforced with extra bracing. But Sarah's greatest challenge was still ahead of her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The remaining section of fence would take her directly along the property line she shared with the Double Diamond Ranch. This was the most critical part of the project, the section where she suspected her cattle had been stolen. It was also the most visible part of her property from the main road, which meant her work would be impossible to ignore. Sarah knew that Richard Blackwood Jr. would eventually notice what she was doing. She also knew that he wouldn't be happy about it. A well-built fence would make it much harder for anyone to access her property without permission. It would also send a clear message that Sarah Martinez wasn't going to be pushed around. As she prepared to start work on the most challenging section of her fence, Sarah had no idea that her story was about to take another dramatic turn. Because someone had indeed been watching her work, someone with the power to change everything. But that someone wasn't who she expected. The morning Sarah began working on the eastern fence line, she noticed the black pickup truck parked on the hill overlooking her property. It was too far away to see the license plate, but she recognized the silhouette of Ford F350 King Ranch Edition, the kind that cost more than most people's houses. The truck sat there for 20 minutes while Sarah dug post holes, then disappeared without a sound. Sarah wiped the sweat from her forehead and kept working. She had bigger problems than curious neighbors. What she didn't know was that the truck belonged to Connor Blackwood, Richard Blackwood Jr.'s 28-year-old son. Connor had been driving back from checking cattle in the north pasture when he spotted the pregnant woman working alone in the blazing sun. Something about the scene had stopped him cold. Connor was nothing like his father. Where Richard was calculating and ruthless, Connor was thoughtful and principled. He'd graduated from Texas A&M with a degree in agricultural business, but instead of joining the family empire immediately, he'd spent 3 years working on other people's ranches, learning the business from the ground up. He'd bucked hay, branded cattle, and fixed fences in 100-degree heat because he wanted to understand what real ranch work felt like. His father had called it a waste of time. "We own the ranches, son. We don't work for them," Richard had said. But Connor believed you couldn't manage what you didn't understand. Now, watching Sarah Martinez drive fence posts with the determination of someone fighting for her life, Connor felt something he'd never experienced before. It wasn't pity. There was nothing pitiful about what she was doing. It was respect. mixed with a growing sense that something wasn't right about the situation. Connor knew about the Martinez ranch. His father had mentioned it several times over. The years, always in the context of expansion opportunities. Richard had made offers on the property multiple times, each one rejected politely but firmly. Connor also knew that Jake Martinez had died in an accident 6 months ago, leaving his pregnant wife to run the ranch alone. What Connor didn't know was that 26 heads of Martinez cattle were currently grazing in the Double Diamond's remote south pasture, mixed in with their own herd. That evening, Connor sat across from his father at dinner in the sprawling main house of the Double Diamond Ranch. The house was a monument to the Blackwood family's success. 8,000 square feet of Texas limestone, an imported timber, with a dining room that could seat 20 people. Tonight, it was just the two of them, as it had been since Connor's mother died in a car accident when he was 15. "I saw the Martinez woman working on the fence today," Connor said, cutting into his steak. "She's 8 months pregnant, Dad. What's she doing out there?" Richard looked up from his plate, his expression carefully neutral. "I wouldn't know. Not our concern. She's building fences around the entire perimeter of her property. Professional quality work, from what I could see. That's a massive undertaking for anyone, let alone someone in her condition." "People do strange things when they're desperate," Richard replied. "The Martinez ranch is about to go into foreclosure. Bank's been patient, but patience has limits." Connor set down his fork. "How do you know about the foreclosure?" Richard smiled the thin smile that Connor had learned to recognize as dangerous. "I make it my business to know these things. Opportunity doesn't announce itself, son. You have to stay informed." "Are you planning to buy the ranch when it goes to auction?" "I'm planning to make a fair offer before it gets to that point. Save everyone the embarrassment and expense of a public auction. It's the neighborly thing to do." Connor studied his father's face. Richard Blackwood Jr. had built his empire by being 3 steps ahead of everyone else, but he'd also built it by being utterly ruthless when the situation called for it. Connor had seen his father destroy competitors, buy out struggling neighbors, and manipulate local politics to get what he wanted. All legal, all business, but not always ethical. "What if she doesn't want to sell?" Connor asked. "She doesn't have a choice." "Mathematics doesn't care about sentiment, Connor. She owes more than the ranch is worth, and she has no way to pay. The bank will foreclose, and someone will buy it at auction. Better it should be us. We'll at least maintain the property properly." Connor pushed his food around his plate, thinking about the scene he'd witnessed that morning. She looked like she was building that fence to last forever. That doesn't seem like the behavior of someone planning to give up. Richard's expression hardened slightly. Sometimes people need help accepting reality. That fence project of hers is dangerous foolishness. A pregnant woman has no business doing that kind of heavy labor. Someone should talk to her before she hurts herself with a baby. Maybe someone should help her instead of talking to her. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken tension. Richard set down his knife and fork with deliberate precision. "Connor, I'm going to give you some advice that my father gave me, and his father gave him. In this business, there are winners and losers. The winners are the ones who can make hard decisions without letting emotion cloud their judgment. The Martinez Ranch is prime grazing land with excellent water rights. It borders our property on 3 sides, which makes it strategically valuable. When it comes up for sale, we're going to buy it. That's not cruelty, that's business." Connor nodded, but something in his father's tone bothered him. There was a smugness there, a certainty that went beyond simple business planning. After dinner, Connor excused himself and drove into town. Millbrook was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and Connor had grown up hearing the gossip at the hardware store, the diner, and the gas station. If there was more to the Martinez situation than his father was letting on, someone in town would know about it. He found Marcus Thompson at Riley's bar, nursing a beer and watching a Rangers game on the television above the bar. Marcus had been delivering mail in the area for over 2 decades, which made him one of the best sources of local information in 3 counties. "Marcus," Connor said, sliding onto the barstool next to him, "buy you another beer?" Marcus looked surprised but pleased. The Blackwood family didn't usually socialize with the working folks of Millbrook. "Sure, Connor. What brings you to town?" Connor ordered 2 beers and got straight to the point. "I saw Sarah Martinez working on a fence today. Looked like she was pushing herself pretty hard for someone in her condition." Marcus's expression grew serious. "That woman's got more grit than a sandpaper factory. Been at it for 2 weeks now, working from sunrise to sunset. I've been bringing her water when I can, but she's stubborn as a mule about accepting help. Any idea why she's so determined to fence the whole ranch? Seems like a lot of work for someone who might be losing the property soon." Marcus took a long drink of his beer before answering. "You didn't hear this from me, but word is she's missing some cattle. About 26 head, last I heard. Deputy Williams came out to take a look, but you know how these cattle theft cases go. Hard to prove, harder to prosecute." Connor felt his stomach drop. "Missing cattle. Found a cut fence instead of a broken fence, if you know what I mean. Someone took those cattle deliberate-like. Sarah's got her suspicions about who, but suspicions don't pay the bills or get your livestock back." Connor bought Marcus another beer and extracted every detail he could about the missing cattle, the cut fence, and Sarah's financial situation. By the time he left the bar, he had a sick feeling in his stomach and a pretty good idea of what his father had been up to. He drove home slowly, thinking about the conversation he'd had with his father at dinner. Richard's certainty about the Martinez ranch going into foreclosure suddenly made more sense. It was easier to force a sale when the seller was desperate and had no alternatives. Connor didn't sleep well that night. He kept thinking about Sarah Martinez, 8 months pregnant and alone, building a fence in the blazing sun because someone had stolen her cattle and her livelihood. He thought about his father's cold calculation and the way he'd dismissed her situation as not our concern. Most of all, he thought about the Double Diamond South pasture, where his father kept cattle that were rarely counted or closely monitored. The next morning, Connor told his foreman he was going to check the South pasture fencing. It was a reasonable excuse. The pasture was remote and the fence did need occasional maintenance. What Connor was really doing was looking for 26 heads of stolen cattle. The South pasture was a 15-minute ride from the main ranch buildings, accessible only by a dirt road that wound through mesquite trees and rocky hills. It was perfect for keeping cattle that you didn't want anyone to notice. Connor found them grazing peacefully near the stock tank, mixed in with about 60 head of Double Diamond cattle. 26 Angus cattle that didn't belong there. Wearing brands that Connor recognized as the Martinez ranch mark, Connor sat on his horse for a long time, looking at the stolen cattle and thinking about what this meant. His father hadn't just waited for Sarah Martinez to fail. He'd actively ensured her failure by stealing the cattle she needed to save her ranch. It was theft, pure and simple, disguised as a business strategy. The ethical implications were clear enough, but the personal implications were more complicated. Richard Blackwood was Connor's father, the man who'd raised him and built the empire that Connor was supposed to inherit. Exposing his father's theft would destroy both Richard and the Blackwood family reputation. But doing nothing meant watching an innocent woman lose everything because of his family's greed. Connor rode back to the main house with his mind racing. He had to find a way to return the cattle to Sarah Martinez without destroying his father or implicating himself in the theft. It would require careful planning and perfect timing. What he didn't expect was for Sarah Martinez to solve part of his problem for him that afternoon. While Connor was still trying to figure out his next move, Sarah was putting the finishing touches on the corner post that would anchor the most critical section of her new fence. This post had to be perfect. It would bear the stress of 3 fence lines and needed to last for decades. Sarah had mixed the concrete extra thick and dug the hole 18 inches deeper than usual. She was tamping the concrete around the post when she heard the sound of a truck engine coming down the dirt road that led to her property. Sarah looked up to see a black Ford F-350 approaching slowly, dust billowing behind it. Her heart rate quickened. She'd been expecting this confrontation for days. The truck stopped about 50 feet away, and Richard Blackwood Jr. climbed out. He was dressed like he was going to a board meeting instead of visiting a ranch, pressed khakis, expensive boots that had never seen real work, and a polo shirt with the double diamond logo embroidered on the chest. "Mrs. Martinez," he said, approaching with the confident stride of a man who was used to getting his way. "I was hoping we could have a conversation." Sarah leaned on her sledgehammer and waited for him to continue. She was covered in sweat and concrete dust, 8 months pregnant and exhausted, but she wasn't intimidated by Richard Blackwood's expensive clothes and practiced a smile. "I've been watching your fence project with great interest," Richard continued. "It's impressive work, really. But I have to ask, is this the best use of your time and energy right now, given your circumstances?" "My circumstances are my business, Mr. Blackwood." Richard's smile remained fixed, but Sarah caught a flash of irritation in his eyes. "Of course they are. But as your neighbor, I feel a certain responsibility to offer assistance when I see someone struggling unnecessarily." Sarah knew where this conversation was heading, but she let him continue. "I've spoken with Jim Patterson at First National Bank," Richard said. "He tells me you're facing some financial difficulties with the ranch. These things happen. Agriculture is a tough business, and it's especially difficult for someone in your position." "What exactly is my position, Mr. Blackwood?" "Well, you're a young woman, recently widowed, with a baby on the way and no experience running a ranch operation. There's no shame in that, but there's also no shame in accepting help when it's offered." Richard reached into his truck and pulled out a manila folder. "I'd like to make you an offer for the ranch. A generous offer that would solve your financial problems and give you a fresh start, somewhere more suitable for raising a child." Sarah took the folder and glanced at the number written on the purchase agreement. It was more money than she'd ever seen in one place, but it was also about half what the ranch was actually worth. "This is your idea of generosity?" Sarah asked. "It's a fair market offer for a property in distress. Frankly, it's more than you'll get at a foreclosure auction, and it would save you the embarrassment and legal fees." Sarah handed the folder back to him. "I'm not interested." Richard's practiced smile finally slipped. "Mrs. Martinez, I don't think you understand your situation. The bank is going to foreclose on this property in 3 days. You have no way to make the payments, and that fence you're building isn't going to change that. I'm offering you a way out that preserves your dignity and gives you enough money to start over." I said I'm not interested. And I'm saying you don't have a choice. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Sarah felt her baby kick hard, as if responding to her spike in adrenaline. "Is that a threat, Mr. Blackwood?" Richard straightened his shoulders and put his business smile back in place. "It's a statement of fact. Mathematics doesn't care about determination, Mrs. Martinez. You can build all the fence you want, but it won't change the numbers." He climbed back into his truck and rolled down the window. "When you change your mind, and you will, my offer will still be on the table, but it won't be on the table indefinitely." As Richard drove away, Sarah stood alone in the dusty silence, one hand on her swollen belly and the other gripping the sledgehammer. She'd known this confrontation was coming, but hearing the threat made explicit was different from anticipating it. Sarah looked at the fence posts she'd just set, then at the miles of fence line still to be completed. For the first time since starting the project, she wondered if Richard Blackwood was right about mathematics, but then she felt her baby kick again. strong and insistent, and Sarah Martinez made a decision that would change everything. Sarah's decision was simple but dangerous. She was going to find her cattle that evening. After Richard Blackwood's visit, Sarah sat at her kitchen table studying a hand-drawn map of the surrounding ranches. Jake had sketched it years ago during a boundary dispute with another neighbor, marking every property line, water source, and access road within a 10-mile radius. Sarah had found it in his desk drawer while looking for insurance papers. And now it was her battle plan. The Double Diamond Ranch covered 15,000 acres, with dozens of pastures scattered across rolling hills and hidden valleys. If someone wanted to hide stolen cattle, they'd put them somewhere remote, away from the main roads and ranch buildings. Sarah traced her finger along the property lines, looking for pastures that bordered public roads or had easy access from her property. Her baby kicked restlessly as she hunched over the map. Dr. Reeves had warned her about stress and overexertion, but Sarah couldn't afford to slow down now. She had 3 days before the foreclosure deadline, and finding those cattle was her only hope of saving the ranch. Sarah's plan was risky but straightforward. She would search the Double Diamond's remote pastures systematically, starting with the areas most likely to hide stolen livestock. If she found her cattle, she'd document their location and contact Sheriff Morrison directly instead of dealing with Deputy Williams, who had been less than helpful. What Sarah didn't know was that Connor Blackwood was planning his own intervention. Connor had spent the day wrestling with the moral implications of his father's theft. He could return the cattle anonymously, but that would only solve part of Sarah's problem. She still needed money to bring her loan current, and 26 head of cattle wouldn't generate enough cash. He could loan her the money directly, but that would raise questions about his motives and might be seen as charity rather than justice. Finally, Connor decided on a plan that was both risky and complicated, but it was the only way he could see. To make things right without destroying his family, he would help Sarah find the cattle, then use his influence to pressure his father into making a legitimate offer for the ranch, one that reflected its true value rather than its distressed status. It wasn't perfect justice, but it would give Sarah options she didn't currently have. Connor's first step was gaining Sarah's trust, which wouldn't be easy given her justified suspicion of anyone named Blackwood. The next morning, Connor drove to the Martinez Ranch with a thermos of coffee and a story he'd rehearsed a dozen times. He found Sarah exactly where he expected, working on fence in the preyed-on darkness, a battery-powered lantern providing the only illumination in the vast Texas landscape. "Mrs. Martinez," Connor called out as he approached, making sure to announce himself clearly. A pregnant woman working alone in the dark was likely to be nervous about unexpected visitors. Sarah looked up from the wire she was stretching, her face suspicious and alert. "You're Connor Blackwood?" "Yes, ma'am." "I was hoping we could talk." Sarah picked up the rifle she kept nearby while working. She didn't point it at Connor, but she didn't set it down either. "If your father sent you to pressure me into selling, you can save your breath. He didn't send me. In fact, he doesn't know I'm here, and he wouldn't approve if he did." Connor held up the thermos. "I brought coffee. Figured you might be getting tired of working alone." Sarah studied his face in the lantern light. Connor looked younger than his 28 years, with the kind of deep tan that came from actual outdoor work rather than expensive vacations. His hands were calloused, his boots were worn, and his jeans had the kind of stains that came from real ranch work. "Why are you here, Mr. Blackwood?" "Because I think you're getting a raw deal, and I might be able to help." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Help? Your family's been trying to buy my ranch for years. Now that I'm desperate, your father shows up with a lowball offer and veiled threats. Forgive me if I'm skeptical about Blackwood family assistance." Connor sat down on a nearby boulder, making himself less threatening. "You're right to be skeptical. My father is aggressive in his business dealings, but I'm not my father." "Prove Connor took a deep breath. This was the moment he'd been dreading and planning for. "I know where your cattle are." Sarah went very still. The only sound was the wind rustling through the mesquite trees and the distant lowing of cattle somewhere in the darkness. "What did you say? You're missing cattle." 26 heads of Angus stolen 3 weeks ago when someone cut your fence." "I know where they are." Sarah's grip tightened on the rifle. "Did you take them?" "No, but they're on my family's property, and I think my father knows about it." Sarah felt her legs go weak. She'd suspected the Blackwoods were involved, but hearing it confirmed was like being punched in the stomach. "Your father stole my cattle. I don't know if he ordered it or just didn't ask questions when they showed up. But yes, they're in our south pasture mixed in with our herd." Sarah's mind raced. This was the confirmation she'd needed, but it was also incredibly dangerous information. The Blackwoods had money, influence, and political connections. If Connor was telling the truth, she had evidence that could destroy Richard Blackwood. If he was lying, she was walking into a trap. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "Because it's wrong. Because you're about to lose everything you've worked for, because of my family's greed. And because ... Connor hesitated, then continued. "Because watching you build this fence has been the most inspiring thing I've seen in years. You're fighting for something that matters, and you deserve a fair fight." Sarah set down her rifle but kept it within reach. "What do you want from me?" "I want to help you get your cattle back. And I want to help you save your ranch." "In exchange for what?" Connor smiled grimly. "In exchange for you not destroying my father when this is all over. He's a hard man, but he's still my father." Sarah considered the offer. It was risky trusting Connor, but she was out of options and running out of time. "How do I know this?" "Isn't a setup? You don't. But you're welcome to bring that rifle along when we go to find your cattle." Connor's plan was more sophisticated than Sarah had expected. Instead of simply returning the cattle, he wanted to create a situation where Sarah could document their location and condition, then leverage that evidence to force a fair resolution. It was a careful balance between justice and family loyalty. They would wait until dawn, when the cattle would be easier to count and photograph. Connor would lead Sarah to the south pasture using back roads that avoided the main ranch buildings. Once they had documented the stolen cattle, they would confront Richard Blackwood together, Connor as a family member demanding accountability, Sarah as the victim demanding justice. As they waited for dawn, sitting in Connor's truck with the heater running, Sarah found herself studying the young man who had just turned her world upside down. He was nothing like his father, quieter, more thoughtful, with calloused hands that suggested he actually worked for a living. "Why are you really doing this?" Sarah asked. "There has to be more to it than just doing the right thing." Connor was quiet for a long moment. "When I was 15, my mother died in a car accident. She was driving home from a charity event, and a drunk driver ran a red light. The man who killed her was the son of one of my father's business partners." Sarah waited for him to continue. "My father could have destroyed that family. He had the money and the connections to make sure the kid went to prison for decades. Instead, he made a deal. The kid served 2 years, and my father got a valuable piece of land at a fraction of its worth. He called it pragmatic justice." Connor's jaw tightened. "I called it selling my mother's life for real estate." "We haven't had a real conversation." Since Sarah began to understand. "This isn't about me or my cattle. This is about you and your father." "Maybe, but that doesn't make it wrong." As the sun rose over the Texas landscape, Connor and Sarah drove toward the Double Diamond South pasture. Sarah's rifle lay across her lap, and Connor's camera was charged and ready. They were about to confront one of the most powerful men in the county, armed with nothing but evidence and moral conviction. The south pasture was exactly as Connor had described, a remote grazing area accessible only by a winding dirt road. As they topped the final hill, Sarah saw them, 26 head of her cattle, grazing peacefully among the double diamond herd. As if they belonged there, Sarah's hands shook as she counted the familiar animals. There was Buttercup, a heifer with a distinctive white patch on her forehead. There was Big Ben, the massive bull that Jake had named after his favorite football player. There were the twin calves born last spring, now grown but still recognizable. By their matching markings, Connor documented everything methodically: the cattle, their brands, their location, even the cut fence that had been hastily repaired. Sarah provided running commentary, identifying individual animals and explaining their significance to her operation. "That's enough evidence to put my father in prison," Connor said quietly as he reviewed the photos. "Is that what you want?" Connor looked out at the stolen cattle, then back at Sarah. "I want him to do the right thing voluntarily, but if he won't..." He shrugged. "Some things are more important than family loyalty." They were preparing to leave when Sarah spotted the dust cloud on the horizon. Someone was coming down the access road, moving fast. "We need to go," Connor said, but it was too late. The approaching vehicle was between them and the exit dot as the truck got closer. Sarah recognized the driver, Richard Blackwood Jr., and he wasn't alone. Deputy Williams sat in the passenger seat, and both men looked like they were ready for a confrontation. Richard's truck skidded to a stop 20 feet away, and both men climbed out. Richard's face was dark with fury, while Deputy Williams looked uncomfortable but determined. "Connor, what the hell are you doing here?" Richard demanded. "I'm documenting cattle theft," Connor replied calmly. 26 heads of Martinez cattle that somehow ended up at our pasture. These cattle wandered onto our property through a damaged fence. We've been trying to locate the owner." Sarah stepped forward, her pregnancy making her movements awkward, but her voice steady. "Those cattle were stolen from my property 3 weeks ago. The fence was cut, not damaged." Deputy Williams cleared his throat. "Mrs. Martinez, you're trespassing on private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "She's here at my invitation," Connor said. "This is still my family's property, and I have every right to invite guests." Richard's face was turning red. "Connor, you're making a serious mistake. This woman is desperate and looking for someone to blame for her problems. Don't let her drag you into her fantasies." Sarah held up Connor's camera. "These aren't fantasies. These are photographs of my stolen cattle on your property. Cattle that were taken from my ranch 3 weeks ago when someone cut my fence." "Prove it," Richard snapped. "Prove those cattle are yours." Sarah smiled grimly. "Every one of these animals is branded with the Martinez ranch mark. Every one is documented in my herd records. And several of them have distinctive markings that I can describe in detail." She pointed to Ben. "That bull has a scar on his left shoulder from when he tangled with barbed wire 2 years ago. Jake and I spent 3 hours stitching him up." She pointed to another animal. "That heifer is missing the tip of her left ear from a dog attack when she was a calf." One by one, Sarah identified the stolen cattle with details that only their owner would know. With each identification, Deputy Williams looked more uncomfortable and Richard's face got redder. Finally, Richard turned to his son. "Connor, this is a family business. We'll discuss it at home." "No, Dad. This is criminal business. These cattle were stolen, and you know it. The confrontation that followed would be talked about in Millbrook for years to come." Father and son faced off in the dusty pasture while Sarah Martinez, 8 months pregnant and holding a rifle, stood witness to the dissolution of one of the county's most powerful families. But what happened next surprised everyone, including Sarah herself. Connor pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number. "Sheriff Morrison, this is Connor Blackwood. I need to report a cattle theft." "Yes, sir, I'll hold." Richard lunged for the phone, but Connor stepped away. 26 head of cattle, stolen from the Martinez ranch 3 weeks ago. "Yes, sir, they're on my family's property right now. I have photographs and documentation. As Connor spoke to the sheriff, Richard turned to Deputy Williams with desperation in his eyes. "Frank, you know this family. We've been good to this community for generations. Don't let some misunderstanding destroy everything we've built." Deputy Williams looked at the stolen cattle, then at Sarah's swollen belly, then at the photographs Connor had taken. Finally, he pulled out his own cell phone. "Sheriff Morrison? This is Deputy Williams." "Yes, sir. I'm here at the Double Diamond South pasture. You need to get out here right away." Richard Blackwood Jr. had built his empire on the assumption that money and influence could overcome any obstacle. As he watched his son and a pregnant woman destroy everything he'd worked for, he realized that some obstacles were bigger than wealth and power. But Sarah Martinez wasn't done fighting yet. She had her cattle back, but she still needed to save her ranch. And she was about to discover that sometimes the most unexpected allies come from the most unlikely places. Sheriff Morrison arrived with 2 deputies and a livestock trailer 30 minutes later. By then, word had somehow spread through Millbrook that something major was happening at the Double Diamond Ranch. Marcus Thompson showed up in his mail truck, claiming he was delivering a package. Dolores Hernandez arrived with her nephew, saying they were looking for a lost dog. Even Dr. Patricia Reeves appeared, claiming she was making a house call to check on Sarah's condition. The truth was, everyone in town had been following Sarah's fence-building project with fascination, and news of the confrontation had traveled fast through the network of gossip that connected every ranch, store, and household in the county. Sheriff Morrison was a 60-year-old veteran lawman who had seen everything in his 35-year career. He took one look at the situation: Connor Blackwood standing with a pregnant woman against his own father, stolen cattle documented with photographs, and Deputy Williams looking like he wanted to be anywhere else, and knew this was going to be complicated. "All right, people," Sheriff Morrison announced. "I need everyone except the principals to step back and give us room to work." He turned to Sarah first. "Mrs. Martinez, I understand you're claiming these cattle were stolen from your property." Sarah handed him a folder she'd brought from her truck. "Every animal is documented here. Herd records, vaccination records, breeding history. I can identify each animal individually." The sheriff reviewed the paperwork while Connor showed him the photographs. On his camera, Richard Blackwood stood silently, his expensive clothes incongruous in the dusty pasture, watching his carefully constructed world collapse around him. "Mr. Blackwood," Sheriff Morrison said, addressing Richard, "these appear to be Martinez cattle on your property. How do you explain that?" Richard's jaw worked silently for a moment before he answered. "The fence between our properties was damaged. These cattle wandered onto our land. We've been trying to locate the owner." Connor stepped forward. "Dad, that's not true, and you know it. Connor, you're my son. Don't do something you'll regret for the rest of your life. I already regret waiting this long." Connor turned to Sheriff Morrison. "The fence wasn't damaged, it was cut. I can show you the exact locations. These cattle were stolen, and I believe my father ordered it." The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Richard's face went pale, then flushed red with anger and humiliation. "Sheriff Morrison," Richard said, his voice tight with control, "my son is obviously emotional about this situation. He's always had a soft spot for lost causes. I suggest we handle this matter privately, between neighbors." "I'm afraid it's too late for that, Mr. Blackwood. Cattle theft is a felony in Texas, and we have documented evidence." Sheriff Morrison gestured to one of his deputies. "Dave, start photographing these animals and their brands. Get clear shots of each one." As the deputy began documenting the stolen cattle, Sheriff Morrison turned back to Sarah. "Mrs. Martinez, I need to ask you some questions about when you discovered the theft and what steps you took." Sarah recounted the entire story, finding the cut fence, calling Deputy Williams, being told there wasn't much that could be done. As she spoke, Deputy Williams grew more uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot and avoiding eye contact with his boss. "Frank," Sheriff Morrison said quietly, "why wasn't I informed about this cattle theft report? It seemed like... without witnesses or clear evidence." Deputy Williams trailed off, realizing how weak his explanation sounded. 26. Head of cattle isn't a minor property dispute, Frank. This should have been investigated thoroughly. Sheriff Morrison made some notes, then addressed the group. "Here's what's going to happen. Mrs. Martinez, you can take your cattle home today. We'll provide an escort to make sure they get to your property safely. Mr. Blackwood," he turned to Richard, "you're not under arrest at this time, but I strongly recommend you contact an attorney. This investigation is far from over." Richard nodded stiffly, but Connor stepped forward again. "Sheriff Morrison, there's something else you need to know." Connor pulled out his cell phone and showed the sheriff a text message he'd received that morning. "My father sent this to our ranch foreman an hour ago. He was planning to move these cattle to a different pasture before you arrived." The text read, "Move the south pasture cattle to the north range immediately. Don't ask questions. Sheriff." Morrison's expression darkened. "Mr. Blackwood, attempting to conceal evidence is a serious offense. I'm placing you under arrest for cattle theft and obstruction of justice." As the handcuffs clicked around Richard Blackwood's wrists, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just hope that she might save her ranch, but hope that justice actually existed in a world that had seemed determined to crush her. But the cattle recovery was only the first part of Sarah's problem. 26 head of cattle, even prime Angus. Beef wouldn't generate enough money to bring her loan current. She needed at least $12,800, and the cattle might bring $8,000 if she was lucky and found a good buyer quickly. As Sheriff Morrison led Richard Blackwood away, Connor approached Sarah with an expression of nervous determination. "Mrs. Martinez, I know this doesn't fix everything. You still have the loan problem, and selling the cattle won't be enough." Sarah nodded wearily. The adrenaline of the confrontation was wearing off, and she was becoming aware of how exhausted and uncomfortable she was. Her back ached, her feet were swollen, and the baby seemed to be doing gymnastics inside her. "I have a proposition," Connor continued. "The Double Diamond Ranch needs to make this right. Not just returning your cattle, but compensating you for the financial damage my father's actions caused. I don't want charity. It's not charity, it's restitution. My father's theft put you in an impossible position, and we're going to fix that." Connor pulled out a checkbook and started writing. "This check will cover the amount you need to bring your loan current, plus extra for the stress and hardship you've endured." Sarah looked at the check. It was for $20,000 more money than she'd ever held in her hands. "I can't accept this." "Yes, you can. And you will, because it's the right thing to do." Connor's voice was firm, but gentle. "My family took something from you illegally. This is just restoring what you should have had all along." Sarah stared at the check, torn between pride and desperation. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing. Well, almost nothing," Connor smiled. "I want you to finish that fence. I've been watching you work, and it's the most impressive thing I've ever seen. A fence built by someone who refused to give up deserves to be completed." Dr. Reeves approached them, her medical bag in hand. "Sarah, I need to check on you and the baby. This has been a stressful morning, and you're in your final month." Sarah allowed Dr. Reeves to check her blood pressure and listen to the baby's heartbeat. Everything was normal, but the doctor was firm about her next instructions. "You're going home, and you're going to rest for the remainder of your pregnancy. No more fence building, no more heavy labor. That baby could come any day now." Sarah started to protest, but Dr. Reeves cut her off. "This isn't a request. This is a medical order. You've pushed yourself to the absolute limit, and now it's time to think about your child's safety." As the crowd began to disperse and the cattle were loaded for transport back to the Martinez ranch, Connor made Sarah an offer that surprised everyone, including himself. "I'll finish your fence." Sarah looked at him skeptically. "You'll what?" "I'll finish building your fence. You've done the hard part, the design, the planning, most of the physical work. I can handle the remaining sections." "Why would you do that?" Connor looked out at the fence line Sarah had already completed, then back at her swollen figure. "Because some things are too important to leave unfinished. And because I need to do something to make up for what my family took from you." The offer sparked a debate among the gathered townspeople. Marcus Thompson thought it was a fine gesture. Dolores Hernandez worried about the optics of a Blackwood working on Martinez property. Dr. Reeves just wanted Sarah to go home and rest. But Sarah had already made her decision. "All right, Mr. Blackwood, you can finish my fence. But you do it." "Right, or you don't do it at all," Connor grinned. "Yes, ma'am. I wouldn't have it any other way." The drive back to the Martinez ranch was surreal. Sarah rode in Connor's truck while her cattle followed in the sheriff's trailer, escorted by 2 deputies and a growing convoy of curious townspeople. Word had spread even further, and people lined the route to watch the pregnant woman who had taken on the Blackwood empire and won out at the ranch. Unloading the cattle felt like a celebration. The animals seemed happy to be home, immediately heading for their familiar water sources and grazing areas. Sarah stood watching them, one hand on her belly, feeling like she was seeing her property clearly for the first time in months. "They look good," Connor said, standing beside her. "You took good care of them." Jake always said that cattle can sense when you care about them. They were his pride and joy. Connor was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry about your husband. I know this. Whole situation would have been different if he was still here." Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar ache of loss. "Jake would have liked you. He believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard." As the sun set over the Martinez ranch, Sarah sat on her front porch while Connor examined the remaining fence work. The check from the Blackwood ranch was safely deposited, her cattle were home, and for the first time in months, she felt like she might actually make it through this crisis. Connor returned with a notebook full of measurements and calculations. "I can have this finished in a week if I work full days. The corner posts are the most time-consuming part, but you've already done the hardest sections. What about your father? What about the double diamond?" Connor's expression grew serious. "My father will probably go to prison. The ranch will need new management, and that falls to me. But I can handle both jobs, finishing your fence and running our operation." Sarah studied his face in the porch light. "This is going to change everything for you." Everything needed to change. "I just didn't have the courage to do it until I watched you building fence alone in the desert, 8 months pregnant, refusing to give up." That night, Sarah slept better than she had in months. Her cattle were safe, her loan was current, and her fence was going to be completed by someone who understood the importance of doing the job right. But Sarah's story was far from over. In fact, the most surprising chapter was about to begin. 3 days later, Sarah woke up to the sound of hammering. She looked out her bedroom window to see Connor Blackwood setting fence posts in the bright-on darkness, working by the light of a battery-powered lantern, just as she had done. Sarah made coffee and walked out to where Connor was working. He was stripped to a t-shirt despite the cool morning air, sweat already beading on his forehead. "You're starting early," Sarah observed. "Wanted to get the corner posts set before the concrete delivery arrives. This section needs to be perfect. It's going to anchor the entire eastern fence line." Sarah watched him work, noting the precision of his measurements and the care he took with each post. This wasn't a rich man playing at ranch work. This was someone who understood that a fence built wrong would fail when you needed it most. "Connor," Sarah said, "can I ask you something? What's going to happen when your father gets out of jail?" Connor paused in his digging. I honestly don't know. He'll probably never forgive me for testifying against him. The family business relationships will be destroyed. Some people in town will see me as a traitor. Do you regret it? Connor straightened up and looked at Sarah. No. For the first time in my adult life, I don't regret anything I've done. As Connor returned to work, Sarah realized that her fence-building project had accomplished something she'd never intended. It had revealed who people really were when everything was on the line. Some people, like Deputy Williams, chose self-interest over justice. Others, like Connor Blackwood, chose to do the right thing even when it cost them everything. But Sarah's biggest revelation was still to come, and it would change not just her life, but the entire future of both branches. Sarah's contractions started on the 5th day of Connor's fence work, just as he was setting the final corner post. She had been sitting on the porch, watching him work and timing the baby's increasingly active movements, when the first real contraction hit her like a lightning bolt. "Connor," she called out, her voice tight with pain and surprise. He looked up from the concrete mixer, saw her expression, and dropped his tools immediately. "Is it time?" "I think so." Sarah gripped the porch railing as another contraction rolled through her. They're about 8 minutes apart. Connor was at her side. In seconds, his hands still dusty from concrete work. "Hospital. Not yet. First babies usually take their time." Sarah tried to smile but grimaced as another contraction peaked. "But we should probably call Dr. Reeves." What happened next would become legend in Millbrook. Connor called Dr. Reeves, who was attending another delivery in the next county and couldn't get to Sarah for at least 2 hours. He called the ambulance service, but their vehicle was responding to a highway accident. The nearest hospital was 45 minutes away on winding country roads. "We could take my truck," Connor offered, but Sarah shook her head. "These contractions are getting stronger. I don't want to be stuck in a vehicle if things progress faster than expected." Connor made a decision that surprised both of them. "I'm calling my mother's old friend, Elena Vasquez. She's a retired nurse midwife who lives about 10 minutes away. She helped deliver half the babies in this county before the hospital expanded their services." Elena Vasquez arrived in a cloud of dust, driving her ancient pickup truck like she was racing to save a life, which, as it turned out, she was. At 73, Elena was a force of nature who had delivered over 800 babies in her 40-year career. She took one look at Sarah and immediately began setting up her portable medical kit. "Mia, this baby is coming fast," Elena announced after examining Sarah. "We're not going to make it to any hospital." Connor's face went pale. "What do you need me to do?" "Boil water, get clean towels, and then stay calm, because this young mother is going to need all the support she can get." As Sarah's labor intensified, Connor found himself in the unexpected role of birth coach. Elena directed him to help Sarah with breathing exercises, provide physical support during contractions, and generally do whatever Sarah needed to stay comfortable. "I can't do this," Sarah gasped during a particularly intense contraction. "I'm not ready. I don't know how to be a mother." "Yes, you can," Connor said firmly. "You built a fence around an entire ranch while 8 months pregnant. You took on my father and won. You can do anything." Elena smiled as she monitored Sarah's progress. "Listen to him, Mia. He's right. You're the strongest woman I've ever seen." 3 hours later, as the sun was setting over the completed fence line, Sarah Martinez gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Connor cut the umbilical cord with hands that shook from exhaustion and emotion, while Elena cleaned and examined the baby. 7 pounds 4 ounces, Elena announced. "Perfect in every way." Sarah held her daughter for the first time, tears streaming down her face. The baby had Jake's dark hair and Sarah's determined chin. "Her name is Isabella," Sarah whispered. "Isabella Martinez." Connor stood awkwardly by the bed, unsure of his role in this intimate moment. He had just helped deliver a baby on the ranch he was supposed to inherit from his criminal father, for a woman he had known for less than a week. "Connor," Sarah said softly, "thank you for everything. Thank you for letting me be here." Elena packed up her equipment with the efficiency of decades of practice. "Sarah, you and the baby are both healthy, but I want Dr. Reeves to examine you both tomorrow. Connor, you did good work today." As Elena prepared to leave, she pulled Connor aside. "That woman has been through more in the past few months than most people face in a lifetime. She's going to need help, especially with a newborn and a ranch to run." Connor nodded. "I'll make sure she has whatever she needs. I'm not talking about money or hired help. I'm talking about someone who cares about her and the baby as people, not as a responsibility." Connor looked through the window at Sarah holding her daughter, and something shifted in his chest. Over the past week, his respect for Sarah had grown into something deeper. She wasn't just a neighbor he was helping, she was becoming someone he couldn't imagine being without. The next morning brought visitors. Dr. Reeves arrived first, pronouncing both mother and baby perfectly healthy. Sheriff Morrison came by too. Update Sarah on Richard Blackwood's case. He had pled guilty to cattle theft and would serve 18 months in county jail. Deputy Williams had been suspended pending an internal investigation. Marcus Thompson brought a care package from the Mayo care package from the townspeople, food, baby clothes, and a handmade quilt from the church ladies. Dolores Hernandez arrived with enough Mexican food to feed an army and a strong opinion about the baby's name. "Isabella is perfect," Dolores declared, holding the baby with practiced ease. "She looks like a fighter, just like her mama." But the most unexpected visitor was Richard Blackwood himself. Connor was checking the water supply in the eastern pasture when his father's truck pulled up to the Martinez house. Richard had been released on bail pending sentencing, and this was the first time father and son had seen each other since the arrest. Connor walked back to the house to find his father standing awkwardly on the front porch, still dressed in expensive clothes that seemed ridiculous in the ranch setting. "Dad," Connor said neutrally. "Connor," Richard's voice was strained. "I came to to apologize to Mrs. Martinez." Sarah appeared at the door, holding baby Isabella. The contrast was stark. The disgraced millionaire in his tailored clothes, and the young mother in simple ranch wear, holding the future in her arms. "Mrs. Martinez," Richard began, his voice thick with emotion. "I came to say I'm sorry. What I did was wrong, and there's no excuse for it." Sarah studied his face, looking for sincerity. "Why did you do it?" Richard was quiet for a long moment. "Because I could. Because I've spent so many years getting what I wanted that I forgot there's a difference between business and bullying." He looked at Connor, then back at Sarah. "My son did the right thing, even though it cost him his relationship with his father. That's something I'll have to live with." "It doesn't have to cost him that relationship," Sarah said quietly. "People can change if they want to." Richard's eyes filled with tears as he looked at the baby in Sarah's arms. "She's beautiful. Your husband would have been proud." "Yes, he would have been." Richard turned to Connor. "Son, I know I've lost the right to give you advice, but I'm going to say this anyway. Don't let pride or stubbornness destroy something good. I did that once, and I regret it every day." As Richard drove away, Connor and Sarah stood together on the porch, watching the dust settle. What did he mean about pride and stubbornness? Sarah asked. Connor was quiet for a moment. "When my mother died, my father wanted to grieve privately. He pushed away everyone who tried to help, including me. We never talked about losing her, never shared our grief. We just stopped connecting." Sarah adjusted the baby in her arms. "Grief makes people do strange things. Yes, it does. But so does hope." Connor turned to look at Sarah and Isabella. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. This past week, helping you, being here for Isabella's birth, it's changed everything for me." "Connor, let me finish." I know this is complicated. I know you're still grieving your husband, and you have a newborn baby, and the last thing you need is another complication. But I can't pretend I don't care about you." Sarah was quiet for a long time, looking out at the completed fence that surrounded her property. The fence that had started as a desperate attempt to save her ranch had become something more, a symbol of refusing to give up, of fighting for what mattered. 3 months ago, my biggest worry was whether we'd have enough rain for the summer pasture, Sarah said finally. Now I'm a widow with a newborn baby, fighting to save my ranch from foreclosure, and the son of the man who tried to destroy me is telling me he cares about me. I know it's crazy, it is crazy. Sarah looked down at Isabella, who was sleeping peacefully despite the adult drama surrounding her. But crazy might be exactly what we need. Connor stepped closer. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that fence out there represents something important. It represents refusing to accept defeat when everyone expects you to fail. It represents building something strong enough to last." Sarah looked up at Connor. "If we're going to do this, whatever this is, we're going to do it right. No rushing, no shortcuts, no assumptions. We're going to build it to last." Connor smiled. "Like a fence." "Exactly like a fence." 6 months later, the Martinez ranch was thriving again. The cattle herd had grown, the pastures were green from good rainfall, and the fence Connor had finished building had proven its worth during a severe thunderstorm that had damaged weaker barriers throughout the county. Connor had moved into the foreman's house on the Martinez property, managing both ranches while his father served his sentence. It was an arrangement that made practical sense and gave Connor and Sarah time to explore their relationship without pressure. Isabella was growing fast, already showing signs of her mother's stubborn determination. She refused to sleep through the night, demanded attention when she wanted it, and had already demonstrated an impressive set of lungs when things didn't go her way. "She's going to be trouble," Connor observed one evening as he helped Sarah with the bedtime routine. "The best kind of trouble," Sarah replied. Rocking her daughter gently. The marriage proposal came on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Sarah had started building her fence. Connor found Sarah in the eastern pasture, checking the fence line he had completed. Baby Isabella was strapped to Sarah's chest in a carrier, wide-eyed and curious about everything around her. "This fence has held up well," Sarah observed, running her hand along the wire Connor had stretched. "It was built by someone who refused to quit," Connor replied. "I just finished what she started." Connor dropped to one knee in the dusty pasture, pulling out a simple diamond ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "Sarah Martinez, you taught me that the most important things in life are worth fighting for. You showed me that strength isn't about having power over others. It's about refusing to give up when everything is against you." Isabella babbled happily from her carrier, as if adding her approval to the proposal. "Will you marry me? Will you? Let me help you raise this amazing little girl. Will you build a life with me that's as strong and lasting as this fence?" Sarah looked at the man who had given up everything to do the right thing, who had helped deliver her daughter, who had proven every day for the past year that love was about showing up when things got difficult. "Yes," she said simply, "but on one condition." Connor grinned. "What's that?" "When Isabella gets old enough, you're going to teach her how to build fence. Because Martinez women know how to build things that last. Deal?" As Connor slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger, Isabella reached out with tiny hands to grab at the shiny object. The three of them stood together in the pasture, surrounded by the fence that had saved them all, looking toward a future that was finally full of hope. The story of the pregnant woman who built a fence around her entire ranch became local legend, told and retold in diners and hardware stores throughout Texas. But for Sarah Martinez Blackwood, it was never about becoming a legend. It was about refusing to give up when everyone expected her to fail. It was about building something strong, enough to last. and it was about discovering that sometimes the most unexpected allies become the most important people in your life. The fence still stands today, a testament to one woman's refusal to surrender and one man's decision to choose justice over family loyalty. But more than that, it stands as proof that some things, love, determination, and doing what's right, are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. 5 years after the fence was completed, Sarah Martinez Blackwood stood in the same pasture where Connor had proposed, watching her daughter Isabella chase butterflies through the tall grass. At 6 years old, Isabella had her mother's determination and her stepfather's thoughtful nature, along with an independent streak that kept both parents on their toes. "Mama, why did you build the big fence?" Isabella asked, running back to Sarah. With a handful of wildflowers. It was a question Isabella asked regularly, and Sarah's answer evolved each time. Today, watching her daughter's curious face, Sarah chose her words carefully. "Sometimes people try to take things that don't belong to them," Sarah explained. "The fence helped protect what was ours, but more importantly, building it showed me that I was stronger than I thought." Isabella nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness of a child who had grown up hearing stories about the legendary fence project. What Isabella didn't know yet was that the fence had done more than save the ranch. It had transformed an entire community. The changes had started small. After Richard Blackwood's conviction, several other small ranchers came forward with their own stories of suspicious cattle losses and property pressure. An investigation revealed a pattern of intimidation and theft, targeting vulnerable families. Throughout the county, the scandal led to reforms in the sheriff's department, the replacement of Deputy Williams with a more competent officer, and the establishment of a rural crime task force that actually took cattle theft seriously. But the biggest change was in how the community viewed itself. Sarah's fence project had become a symbol of resistance against overwhelming odds. When the Johnson family faced foreclosure on their dairy farm, the community rallied to help them restructure their debt. When elderly Mrs. Chun needed assistance maintaining her property after her husband's death, neighbors organized work parties to repair her fences and buildings. The Martinez Blackwood Ranch had become the unofficial headquarters for these community efforts, and Sarah found herself in the unexpected role of local leader and problem solver. "Sarah's got a gift for seeing what needs doing and making it happen," Marcus Thompson told anyone who would listen. He had been promoted to postmaster after his role in exposing the cattle theft, and he used his position to coordinate communication between the far-flung ranch families. Connor had proven equally valuable to the community, but in a different way. His business education and ranch management experience made him a sought-after consultant for struggling agricultural operations. He helped families develop financial plans, negotiate with banks, and modernize their operations without losing their independence. The Double Diamond Ranch had been restructured as well. When Richard was released from jail after serving 14 months, he returned to find his son had transformed the operation into a model of ethical ranching. Connor had terminated the aggressive land acquisition program, improved worker conditions, and established the Blackwood Foundation to provide low-interest loans to small ranchers. The reunion between father and son had been awkward but genuine. Richard had used his time in jail to reflect on his priorities, and he emerged humbled but determined to make amends for his past actions. "I spent 40 years building an empire," Richard told Connor during their first real conversation in years. "You spent 2 years building a legacy. I know which one matters more." Richard had surprised everyone by embracing his new role as grandfather to Isabella and mentor to young ranchers seeking advice. His business acumen, tempered by hard-earned wisdom, proved valuable in helping families navigate the challenges of modern agriculture. But perhaps the most significant change was in Sarah herself. The woman who had once felt isolated and overwhelmed had discovered her own leadership abilities. Sarah found that her experience of nearly losing everything gave her credibility with other struggling families. She understood the desperation, the fear, and the determination required to fight back against impossible odds. Sarah had been elected to the county commission on a platform of supporting rural families and responsible development. She served on the school board, organized the annual ranch rodeo, and had recently been approached about running for state legislature. "I never wanted to be a politician," Sarah confided to Connor one evening as they watched Isabella practice her roping skills in the arena Connor had built behind their house. "You're not a politician," Connor replied. "You're a problem solver who happens to work in government." "Is there a difference?" "With you, there is." Connor had his own political ambitions, though he kept them quiet. Several state agricultural organizations had approached him about leadership positions, and there was talk of him running for agricultural commissioner when the current officeholder retired. But tonight, politics felt far away. Tonight was about family, community, and the satisfaction of work well done. The annual fence inspection had become a tradition in the Martinez-Blackwood household. Every spring, Sarah and Connor would walk the entire perimeter of the original ranch, checking every post and wire, telling Isabella stories about the famous fence-building project that had saved their family. "This post here," Connor said, pointing to a corner post that looked identical to dozens of others. "This is where your mama was working when she went into labor with you." Isabella's eyes widened. "Right here. Right here." "She was determined to finish this section before you were born. But you had other plans." Isabella ran her small hands along the fence post, marveling at the idea that she had been present for such an important moment in family history. "Will I build fences too when I grow up?" Isabella asked. Sarah and Connor exchanged glances. It was a question they'd discussed many times, wondering how much of their story to share with their daughter and when. "You'll build whatever you need to build," Sarah said finally. "Fences, businesses, families, communities. The important thing is that you build them strong enough to last." As they continued their inspection, Isabella chattering about her plans to build a fence around the entire state of Texas, Sarah reflected on how much her definition of strength had evolved. 5 years ago, she had thought strength meant working alone, refusing help, pushing through pain and exhaustion through sheer willpower. Now she understood that real strength meant knowing when to ask for help, when to accept support, and when to use your own experiences to help others. The fence inspection revealed what Sarah and Connor already knew: the structure was as solid as the day it was completed. Connor's workmanship had proven itself through 5 years of Texas weather, and the fence required minimal maintenance. But the inspection also revealed something new. "Connor, look at this," Sarah called, pointing to a section of fence near the creek. Connor joined her and saw what had caught her attention. Someone had been doing unauthorized repair work on their fence. A section of damaged wire had been replaced with new material, and a loose post had been reinforced with additional bracing. "That's not our work," Connor said, examining the repairs. "And it's not yours either," Sarah replied. They found their answer later that day when they discovered Miguel Santos, a 16-year-old whose family lived on a small ranch bordering theirs, working on another section of fence repair. "Miguel," Connor called out, "what are you doing?" The teenager looked up, embarrassed but not ashamed. "Fixing your fence, Mr. Blackwood. My dad says the Martinez fence is special, and it's everyone's responsibility to keep it strong." Connor and Sarah learned that the fence had become an unofficial community project. Neighboring ranchers regularly checked on it during their own property inspections, making small repairs and improvements as needed. It had become a symbol of mutual support and shared responsibility. "The fence doesn't just belong to you anymore," Miguel explained. "It belongs to all of us. It reminds us that we don't have to face problems alone." That evening, Sarah stood on her front porch watching the sunset, paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Isabella was inside, having her bath and chattering to Connor about her plans to become a fence scientist. When she grew up, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Reeves. "Congratulations. The blood test confirms what we suspected. Baby number 2 is due in January." Sarah smiled, placing her hand on her still flat stomach. She and Connor had been trying for another child for over a year, and the news felt like the perfect completion of their family's healing journey. Connor appeared beside her, fresh from Isabella's bath time. "You look happy about something." Sarah handed him the phone. Connor read the message, then swept Sarah into his arms with a whoop of joy that brought Isabella running from the house. "What's happening?" Isabella demanded. "You're going to be a big sister," Connor announced. Isabella's reaction was immediate and characteristically decisive. "Good. I need someone to help me take care of the fence when I'm older." As the family celebrated on the porch, surrounded by the fence that had saved them and the community that had embraced them, Sarah felt a deep sense of completion. Not the completion of a story ending, but the completion of understanding what she had been building all along. The fence had never been just about keeping cattle safe or preventing theft. It had been about creating boundaries that protected what mattered, establishing a foundation strong enough to support whatever came next, and proving that with enough determination, the right help, and a willingness to keep building, anything was possible. Later that night, after Isabella was asleep and the ranch was quiet, Sarah and Connor walked out to check on the cattle one last time. It was a ritual they had maintained since their marriage, a quiet moment to appreciate the life they had built together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't seen me building fence that day?" Sarah asked. Connor considered the question. "I think you would have found a way to save the ranch anyway. You're too stubborn to quit." "But would we have found each other?" "I'd like to think so. Maybe not as quickly, and probably not as dramatically, but yes. I think we were meant to find each other." Sarah leaned against Connor's shoulder, watching their cattle graze peacefully in the moonlight. The fence surrounding them was invisible in the darkness, but Sarah could feel its presence, strong, reliable, protective. "Connor, yes? When this baby is born, I want to plant a tree by the fence line. Something that will grow strong and last long after we're gone." "What kind of tree?" Sarah smiled. "An oak. Something with deep roots and branches strong enough to support whatever wants to grow there." Connor kissed the top of Sarah's head. "I think that's perfect." As they walked back to the house, Sarah thought about the letter she had received earlier that week from a woman in Colorado who was facing foreclosure on her family ranch. The woman had heard Sarah's story and was asking for advice about fighting back against a large corporation trying to force her out. Sarah had already drafted her response, sharing the lessons she had learned about the importance of community support, the value of documentation, and the power of refusing to give up. But mostly she had written about the importance of building something strong enough to last, whether it was a fence, a family, or a future. The fence that surrounded the Martinez Blackwood Ranch would stand for generations, a testament to one woman's refusal to surrender. But more than that, it would stand as proof that the strongest structures aren't built alone. They're built by communities of people who understand that everyone's security depends on everyone else's strength. And somewhere in Colorado, another woman was getting ready to pick up a sledgehammer and start building. 10 years had passed since Sarah first picked up that sledgehammer, and the story of the pregnant woman who built a fence had reached far beyond the borders of Millbrook County. What started as one woman's desperate fight to save her ranch had become a case study taught in agricultural colleges, a symbol referenced by rural advocacy groups, and an inspiration for struggling farmers across the country. But for Sarah Martinez Blackwood, sitting in her truck at 5:30 a.m. watching the sunrise over her expanded ranch, the fame felt secondary to the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Isabella, now 16 and taller than her mother, sat in the passenger seat checking cattle with the practiced eye of someone who had grown up in the business. Her younger brother, Jake Jr., named for the father he would never meet, bounced in his booster seat, chattering about the calves they were going to check on. "Mama, the documentary crew wants to interview me this afternoon," Isabella said, making notes in the ranch journal she maintained. "What should I tell them?" Sarah sighed. The documentary about her fence project was the latest in a series of media attention that had found their family over the years. Magazine articles, news features, even a Hallmark movie that had taken considerable creative liberties with the actual events. "Tell them the truth," Sarah replied. "That building the fence wasn't about being a hero. It was about refusing to give up when giving up seemed like the only option." "Should I tell them about Dad, Jake?" Jake Jr. asked from the back seat. At 9 years old, he was fascinated by the father he had never known, but whose presence was felt throughout their family story. "You can tell them that your daddy would be proud of how strong our family has become," Sarah said, catching his eyes in the rearview mirror, "and that everything we've built stands on the foundation he helped create." The expansion of their ranch had been gradual but strategic. As neighboring families faced retirement or economic pressure, Sarah and Connor had purchased their properties, always with the commitment to maintain them as working ranches rather than development projects. The Martinez Blackwood operation now covered 12,000 acres and employed 15 people full-time, but growth had brought new challenges that Sarah had never anticipated. The success story that had begun with one woman's desperate fence building project was now a multi-million-dollar operation with responsibilities to investors, employees, and the community. Sarah found herself spending more time in boardrooms than pastures, more time on conference calls than horseback. "I miss the simplicity," Sarah had confided to Connor the night before. When it was just about survival, the decisions were clearer. Connor understood. His own journey from disgraced heir to respected businessman had been complicated by similar pressures. The Blackwood Foundation now managed $20 million in rural development funds, and Connor's expertise was sought by agricultural organizations nationwide. "Maybe it's time to delegate more," Connor had suggested. "Let Isabella take on more responsibility. She's ready for it." Isabella had proven herself more than capable. She had finished high school a year early, completed an accelerated agricultural business program at Texas A&M, and returned home with ideas that blended traditional ranching with innovative technology. She had installed solar panels on the barn roofs, implemented a rotational grazing system that improved soil health, and developed a direct-to-consumer beef program that eliminated middleman costs. Most importantly, Isabella had inherited her mother's ability to see potential where others saw problems. "We need to check the Henderson place today," Isabella announced as they drove toward the eastern pasture. "Mrs. Henderson called yesterday. She's thinking about selling." Sarah's heart sank. The Henderson Ranch was an 800-acre property that had been in the same family for 4 generations. Mary Henderson, now 78 and recently widowed, was the last of her line and struggling to maintain the operation alone. Did she say anything about buyers? Westfield Development made her an offer. They want to build a subdivision. Sarah pulled the truck over and stared out at the rolling hills that surrounded them. Westfield Development was a Houston-based company that specialized in converting agricultural land into suburban neighborhoods. They had been circling the area for months, taking advantage of rising land values and aging ranch families. "We can't let that happen," Sarah said firmly. "Mama, we can't save every ranch in the county," Isabella pointed out gently. "We're already stretched pretty thin with the last 3 acquisitions." Isabella was right, but Sarah couldn't accept the idea of concrete and strip malls replacing the pastures and wildlife habitat that had defined this landscape for generations. "What if we approached it differently?" Sarah mused. What if instead of buying the Henderson place ourselves, we helped Mrs. Henderson find a way to keep it in production? This conversation led to one of Sarah's most innovative ideas yet, the Community Ranch Preservation Trust. The concept was ambitious but simple. Instead of selling to developers, struggling ranch families could transfer their land to a community trust that would maintain it as agricultural property in perpetuity. The trust would provide the elderly owners with lifetime income, guarantee the land's preservation, and create opportunities for young ranchers who couldn't afford to buy their own property. Sarah presented the idea at the next county commission meeting, where it generated immediate interest and considerable debate. "It's socialism," declared Bill Murphy, a real estate developer who had been eyeing several ranch properties for conversion. "It's conservation," countered Elena Vasquez, who, at 83, was still attending every public meeting and offering her opinions freely. "Sarah's idea protects our way of life for future generations." The debate that followed revealed deep divisions in the community about growth, development, and the changing nature of rural life. Some residents welcomed the economic opportunities that development could bring. Others feared losing the character that made Millbrook County special. Sarah found herself once again in the unexpected position of leading a community through a difficult decision. 10 years ago, I was just trying to save my own ranch," Sarah told the packed meeting room. "But I learned something important during that fight. When we protect one ranch, we protect all ranches. When we preserve one family's way of life, we preserve the entire community's future." The Community Ranch Preservation Trust was approved by a narrow margin, with Sarah appointed as the founding director. Mary Henderson became the first participant, transferring her ranch to the trust in exchange for lifetime income and the guarantee that her land would remain agricultural forever. But the trust's success created new pressures for Sarah's family. Managing the trust required Sarah to travel frequently, attending conferences, meeting with potential funders, and consulting with other communities interested in replicating the model. The woman who had once worked alone in isolated pastures now found herself on airplanes, in hotel rooms, and far from the land that had shaped her identity. "I feel like I'm losing myself," Sarah confessed to Connor during one of their evening walks. They had maintained this ritual throughout their marriage, but lately, Sarah's travel schedule made it impossible to walk together more than once or twice a week. "You're not losing yourself," Connor replied. "You're evolving. The fence you built saved our ranch, but the trust you're building will save dozens of ranches." "But at what cost? I barely know Jake Jr. anymore. Isabella spends more time managing the ranch than I do. We're successful, but are we happy?" Connor stopped walking and turned to face his wife. Even in the moonlight, he could see the exhaustion and uncertainty in her eyes. "Sarah, do you remember what you told me when I proposed? You said we had to build something strong enough to last." Sarah nodded. "What we've built together, our family, our ranch, our community, it's stronger than either of us individually. Maybe it's time to trust that strength and let other people carry some of the weight." That conversation led to the most difficult decision Sarah had made since picking up the sledgehammer 10 years earlier. She decided to step back from day-to-day ranch operations and focus entirely on the preservation trust that Isabella would take over management of the Martinez Blackwood Ranch at age 17. Making her one of the youngest ranch managers in Texas, Connor would continue running the Blackwood Foundation while supporting Isabella's transition to leadership. "Are you sure about this?" Isabella asked when Sarah presented the plan. "I know the ranch operation, but managing people is different." "You've been preparing for this your whole life," Sarah replied, "and you won't be doing it alone. Your grandfather Richard has agreed to mentor you. Connor will handle the financial side, and I'll be available whenever you need advice." The transition wasn't without challenges. Several longtime employees questioned taking direction from a teenager, regardless of her qualifications. Some neighbors doubted that Isabella could handle the pressures of managing such a large operation. Isabella's response was characteristically direct and effective. She called a meeting of all ranch employees and community partners and delivered a speech that would be remembered for years. "My mother built a fence around this ranch when everyone said it was impossible," Isabella began. "She did it while 8 months pregnant, working alone, with no money and no help. I'm 17 years old. I have a college education, 15 experienced employees, and the best support system any young person could ask for." Isabella paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. "I'm not asking you to follow me because of my last name or because of what my family has accomplished. I'm asking you to follow me because I know this land, I understand this business, and I'm committed to building something that will last for generations." She gestured toward the window where the original fence line was visible in the distance. "That fence my mother built? It wasn't just about keeping cattle in or keeping threats out. It was about establishing boundaries, creating security, and proving that with enough determination, impossible things become possible." Isabella's leadership style proved different from her mother's but equally effective. Where Sarah had led through personal example and quiet determination, Isabella led through collaboration and innovation. She instituted weekly staff meetings, created profit-sharing programs for employees, and established mentorship relationships with neighboring young ranchers. Within 6 months, the Martinez Blackwood Ranch was running more efficiently than ever, and Isabella had earned the respect of even the most skeptical critics. But Isabella's success highlighted a new challenge for Sarah: learning to let go. "She doesn't need me anymore," Sarah told Elena Vasquez during one of their regular coffee meetings. Elena had become Sarah's informal mentor and confidant, the wise elder who helped Sarah navigate the complexities of success and responsibility. "Mia, you're confusing being needed with being wanted," Elena replied with the directness that had made her beloved throughout the community. "Isabella doesn't need you to manage the ranch anymore, but she needs you to be her mother. Jake Jr. doesn't need you to teach him ranch work, but he needs you to show him how to be a good person." Elena sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "And this community doesn't need you to save every ranch personally, but it needs you to show people that saving ranches is possible." The wisdom in Elena's words helped Sarah find peace with her new role. Instead of managing every detail, Sarah focused on the bigger picture, expanding the preservation trust, mentoring other rural women facing similar challenges, and writing a book about her experiences that would reach an even wider audience. The book, titled Building Fences: A Woman's Guide to Fighting for What Matters, became a bestseller and further cemented Sarah's reputation as a voice for rural communities. But more importantly, it provided a roadmap for other women facing seemingly impossible challenges. Letters poured in from across the country, from military wives dealing with deployment and financial stress, from single mothers fighting custody battles, from elderly women protecting family farms from corporate takeovers. Each letter reminded Sarah that her story had resonated far beyond the world of ranching and rural life. One letter, from a woman in Vermont who was fighting to save her family's maple syrup operation, particularly moved Sarah. "I never thought I had anything in common with a Texas rancher, but your story helped me understand that fighting for what you love isn't about the specific thing you're fighting for. It's about refusing to accept defeat when everyone expects you to fail. I started building my own metaphorical fence last month, and I wanted you to know that your courage gave me the strength to pick up my own sledgehammer." Reading letters like this helped Sarah understand that stepping back from ranch management hadn't diminished her impact. It had amplified it. But Sarah's greatest satisfaction came from watching her children embrace the values that had shaped their family story. Jake Jr., now 10 years old, had announced his intention to become a ranch doctor, a veterinarian who specializes in large animal care for rural communities. He spent his afternoons following Dr. Martinez, no relation, Despite the shared surname on calls to neighboring ranches, learning about animal health and the challenges facing rural veterinary practice, Isabella had exceeded everyone's expectations. As ranch manager, but her ambitions extended beyond their family operation. She was developing a program to train young women in ranch management, creating opportunities for the next generation of female agricultural leaders. "I want to build something bigger than just our ranch," Isabella told Sarah during one of their mother-daughter strategy sessions. "I want to build a network of women-led agricultural operations that can support each other and resist the pressures that force families to sell out." Listening to her daughter articulate this vision, Sarah realized that the fence she had built 10 years earlier had become the foundation for something much larger than she had ever imagined. The fence had saved their ranch, but it had also created a legacy of resistance, innovation, and community support that would continue growing long after Sarah was gone. And in small communities across the country, other women were picking up sledgehammers and starting to build. 25 years after Sarah Martinez first picked up a sledgehammer in desperation, she stood at the edge of her property watching her granddaughter practice roping in the same arena where Isabella had learned the skill decades earlier. Luna Blackwood, Isabella's 12-year-old daughter, had inherited the family's determination, along with her grandmother's dark eyes and stubborn chin. She was preparing for the state junior rodeo championships, but more importantly, she was preparing to carry forward a legacy that had transformed an entire region. "Grandma Sarah, tell me again about the fence," Luna called out, taking a break from her practice. Sarah smiled. Even after all these years, even after countless retellings in books, documentaries, and interviews, the story never lost its power for the family members who lived it. "Which part do you want to hear?" Sarah asked, walking over to where Luna was adjusting her rope. "The part where you almost gave up." Sarah paused, surprised by the question. In all the public tellings of her story, she had never admitted to moments of doubt or weakness. The legend of Sarah Martinez required unwavering determination and unshakable faith. But Luna was family, and family deserved the truth. "There were many times I almost gave up," Sarah admitted. "The morning I found out about the stolen cattle, I sat at my kitchen table and cried for 2 hours. When your grandfather Richard tried to force me to sell, I was so scared I could barely breathe. And the day before you were born, Isabella, I looked at that unfinished fence and wondered if I was fighting for something that was already lost." Luna listened intently, her young face serious. "What made you keep going?" Sarah thought about the question carefully. Over the years, she had given many answers: love for the land, determination to honor Jake's memory, refusal to be bullied, faith in justice. All of those answers were true, but they weren't complete. "I kept going because stopping wasn't really an option," Sarah said finally. "Not because I was so brave or strong, but because the alternative, losing everything and starting over with nothing, was more frightening than the work of fighting back." Luna nodded thoughtfully. "Mama says that's what courage really is. Not being unafraid, but doing what needs to be done even when you're scared." Sarah felt a surge of pride in Isabella, who was now 31 and had become everything Sarah had hoped: a successful rancher, a loving mother, and a woman who understood that strength came from facing fear rather than avoiding it. Isabella emerged from the barn, leading her horse after an afternoon checking the northern pastures. At 31, she moved with the confident grace of someone completely comfortable in her environment. The ranch she managed now covered 18,000 acres and employed 35 people, but Isabella still insisted on doing her share of the physical work. "How did the Henderson section look?" Sarah asked. "Good. The new rotational grazing system is really improving the soil quality. We should see significant improvement in grass production next year." The Henderson place had been the first property saved by the Community Ranch Preservation Trust, and its success had led to the preservation of 43 additional ranches across 5 counties. The trust now managed over 200,000 acres of protected agricultural land, ensuring that rural communities would survive the pressures of development and corporate consolidation. Jake Jr., now 24 and fresh out of veterinary school, rode up on his mare with the easy confidence of someone who had grown up in the saddle. He had fulfilled his childhood dream of becoming a ranch doctor and was already building a reputation as one of the most skilled large animal veterinarians in the region. "The new calves in the east pasture all look healthy," he reported. "No signs of the respiratory issues we were worried about." Sarah watched her family work together with the smooth efficiency of people who understood each other completely. Jake Jr. had his father Connor's thoughtful nature and his biological father's deep connection to the land. Isabella combined Sarah's determination with Connor's business acumen. Luna was still finding her own path, but she already showed signs of leadership that promised great things for the future. Connor appeared from the direction of the main house, walking more slowly than he used to, but still moving with purpose. At 53, he had grown distinguished rather than old, his hair silver at the temples and his face lined with the kind of creases that came from years of outdoor work and genuine laughter. "The documentary crew just left," he announced. "They got some good footage of the original fence line for their anniversary special." The 25th anniversary of the fence project had generated renewed media interest, but Sarah found herself less enthusiastic about the attention than she had been in previous years. The story had taken on a life of its own, and sometimes the legend overshadowed the reality of the daily work that kept their success alive. "Did they ask about the expansion plans?" Isabella inquired. Sarah nodded. The family was considering their most ambitious project yet, partnership with Texas A&M University, to create a teaching ranch that would train the next generation of sustainable agriculture leaders. The program would combine practical ranching skills with environmental science, business management, and community development. "I think we should do it," Jake Jr. said. "There's a real need for this kind of comprehensive training. Too many young people leave rural communities because they don't see viable career paths." "It's a big commitment," Connor pointed out. "We'd be taking on responsibility for educating students, managing research projects, and maintaining academic standards along with everything else we're already doing." Sarah listened to her family debate the pros and cons of the teaching ranch proposal, marveling at how far they had all come. The desperate pregnant woman who had started building fence in the desert had been replaced by a confident matriarch, surrounded by capable, caring people who shared her values and vision. But Sarah's greatest pride wasn't in their material success or public recognition. It was in watching Luna practice her roping with the same determination Sarah had brought to fence building 25 years earlier. "Luna," Sarah called out. "Come here for a minute." Luna rode over, her face flushed with exertion and excitement. "I want to show you something," Sarah said, walking toward the original fence line that still marked the eastern boundary of their property. They walked together to the spot where Sarah had driven her first fence post, the place where everything had started. The post was still there, weathered but solid, supporting wire that had kept their cattle safe for a quarter century. "This is where it all began," Sarah said, placing her hand on the familiar post. "I was 8 months pregnant with your aunt, Isabella, scared, alone, and convinced I was going to lose everything I loved." Luna touched the post reverently, understanding its significance. "I want you to understand something," Sarah continued. "The fence I built saved our ranch, but it did something more important. It proved that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to accept defeat." Sarah looked out over the landscape that had shaped her life, rolling hills covered with healthy grass, cattle grazing peacefully, buildings and equipment that represented decades of careful stewardship and hard work. "The fence is still here, and it's still strong. But the most important thing I built wasn't made of wood and wire. It was the knowledge that with enough determination, the right help, and a willingness to keep working when things seem impossible. There's no problem that can't be solved. Luna nodded solemnly, processing the weight of her grandmother's words. Grandma Sarah, when I grow up, what kind of fence will I need to build? Sarah smiled, remembering asking herself the same question many times over the years. Each generation faced different challenges, but the fundamental need to protect what mattered remained constant. I don't know yet, sweetheart. But I know you'll recognize it when you see it. And I know you'll have the strength to build it. As the sun set over the Martinez Blackwood Ranch, 4 generations of the family gathered on the front porch for their evening ritual. Sarah held her newest grandbaby, Isabella's 6-month-old son David, while Luna chattered about her rodeo preparations and Jake Jr. told stories about his veterinary adventures. Connor sat beside Sarah, their hands intertwined after 20 years of marriage, watching their family with quiet satisfaction. Any regrets? He asked quietly. Sarah considered the question. 25 years of challenges, successes, failures, and growth had taught her that regret was a luxury she couldn't afford. None, she said firmly. Every struggle led us here. Every difficult decision made us stronger. Every fence we built, literal and metaphorical, protected something worth preserving. As darkness settled over the ranch, Sarah could see the lights of neighboring properties scattered across the valley. Many of those ranches had been saved by the Preservation Trust, their lights representing families who had found ways to hold on to their heritage and their way of life. The fence they had started as one woman's desperate attempt to save her ranch had become a symbol of resistance against forces that would destroy rural communities. More importantly, it had become proof that individual actions, taken with courage and determination, could create changes that lasted for generations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The teaching ranch proposal would require months of planning and negotiation. The Preservation Trust needed additional funding to expand its reach. Luna would need support in her rodeo preparations, and the ranch would require the constant attention that kept any agricultural operation successful. But tonight, sitting on the porch surrounded by family and looking out over land they had fought to preserve, Sarah Martinez Blackwood felt the deep satisfaction of work well done and a legacy secured. The fence still stood, as strong as the day it was built. But more importantly, the values it represented, determination, community, and refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds, lived on in the hearts and actions of everyone it had touched. And somewhere, in communities across the country, other women were picking up their own sledgehammers and starting to build. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.